Well, welcome to the podcast, Katie. How are you
Thank
doing?
you. Pleasure to be here. Yeah, very good, thanks.
Nice. Before we start, do you want to just say like who you are and what you do, just to sort of give some context?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I'm Catie Gutmann Roberts, and I'm currently an environmental ecologist working in consultancy. And one day a week, I'm at University of Plymouth, where I am a senior research fellow. But yeah, my background was that I studied Barbel for my PhD. So I've basically been studying fish for yeah, well over a decade now. Can't count up the numbers quick enough. Um, but yeah, that's been the kind of species of my interest for some fair time now.
So what do you actually, before I go into that, just because I'm assuming that everyone knows what a barbel is. So for people who don't know, can you just tell them what a barbel is?
Yeah, so they are part of like the carp or cyprinid family. And yeah, they're relatively large fish and they're kind of goldeny brown in color with these red fins. And yeah, the name comes from they have these four barbs around the mouth. So a barb is like a fleshy kind of protrusion. And they've got this downturned mouth for feeding near bed. And yeah, tend to be in fresh water. They're a freshwater fish.
Is it, you might be able to kind of help me with this. Is it barbels or barbules?
I've always called them barbels, but
Okay, all right. Because for years, I called them barbules, and then someone said, no, that's wrong. That's something to do with a bird's feather. And I was like, okay, have I got that wrong then? But apparently, they're both sort of, it depends like who you look at. But I've started saying barbules now because I think that's more accepted. So I think that's the right one.
yeah, that's what I would go with.
Okay, well, you know a lot more about it than me, so I will officially start saying barbules from now on then, because I don't want to pretend that I know. I've built a career on bullshit, basically. So you said you did a PhD on them. So what do you find interesting about Barbel? Why do a PhD on Barbel?
Yeah, so I think the main thing that struck me when I started looking into them was actually how little is known about them. And I found that
Hmm.
just kind of fascinating that it's a fish that's relatively common, it's large, it's across kind of Europe, and there's still a lot that we don't know. So yeah, like the first fish that I studied a lot was for my master's, which was Atlantic salmon. And when I started my reading, there's hundreds and hundreds of papers. Everything you can think of about salmon has been studied by someone. But when I came to look through the Bible literature, I was a bit like, oh, is that it? Is that everything that we know? And as a scientist, I often use the website Fishbase to look
Hmm.
at basic information. And you go on the Fishbase website, and there's, yeah, loads of gaps about the barbel ecology, basically. Even things like the length that they are when they mature is still not on there. So yeah, I just thought, oh, this is something that I could actually contribute some kind of new knowledge on.
And did that PhD lead to some of that then? Did you fill in a few gaps?
Yeah, I think so. So we published all of the kind of chapters out of the PhD. So we've got six papers from the PhD alone, and then yeah, carried on working on them the kind of few years afterwards as well. Um, so yeah, we studied a bunch of things about them during the PhD. It's kind of like three years of a deep dive into Barbel, really. Um, things from like, yeah, how do they breed and where, what do they eat, and how does that change throughout the life cycle? Um, and
That's
then
pretty
yeah,
amazing though, isn't it? To say that you contributed to some of that stuff then, say that people didn't really know before.
yeah, I think so. And like, I think just to get a PhD, you have to add something new to science. That's the kind of definition of getting a PhD.
Oh, I didn't
So
know
it
that.
might only be something small and incremental. But yeah, that's I guess what we all hope to do.
I think that's definitely rings true what you're saying though. Like, yeah, with salmon and trout and things like that, they're pretty well studied, aren't they? Whereas when you look at some of the other freshwater fish, even though that they're quite common, we know so little about them, like things like even perch or barbel, as you said, chub. Just we know the basics, but there's lots of things that you would expect people to know that they don't know. So it's really yeah, it's really good to see that you've done stuff like that and kind of shine a light on them. Where can people find barbel if people want to kind of look for barbel in the UK? Where do we get them?
Yeah, so they're native across Europe and native only to the east of England though. So yeah, they never like naturally colonize the rivers that flow out to the west. So yeah, like big catchments like the Severn, they never actually were naturally found there. But because they've been so popular for angling because they're such a large fish, river managers introduced them in around the 1950s over into the Severn and other kind of west flowing rivers. Um, and then obviously there were probably some additional movements as well that maybe weren't so official.
Yes,
So
yeah, I
yeah,
suspect so.
they can be
Yeah.
found around a lot of the UK now. So yeah, across England, Wales, and Scotland.
I
Um,
don't suppose there's any negative impacts to them being in rivers that they weren't before, because I suppose they would mix of all the fish in eastern flowing rivers. I mean, I don't know if anyone's looked into that.
yeah, it is kind of hard to study because they've been there for so long now.
There's no like
And
base to kind of know what it was like before, sort of thing.
exactly. So
Yeah.
I that was actually one of the things that I studied looking at the overlap of diet with the more like native kind of coarse fish. So yeah, we looked at minnow, chub, and dace and how their diet overlapped with barbel, and it did often overlap, um, sometimes by quite a kind of high percentage. But what we often found was that barbel had the narrowest diet. So we look at it on a kind of 2D plot and it represents like a ring. And yeah, barbel often always have the smallest kind of diet. And that's often because kind of the amount of different foods they eat will correlate to how big the mouth is. And the
Right.
barbel mouth, as they're growing through the juvenile stages, was often smaller than like the chub's mouth or the dace's mouth.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
so yeah, they do overlap in diet, but the other fish ate a broader range of other foods.
Right, okay.
And yeah, people would then maybe think, oh, that means they're in competition. But there's only a competition if there is a limited amount of that food. Um, and like one of the things the baby barb will love to eat are like these chironomid or non-biting midge larvae. And like in the River Team, for example, at the right time of year, the rocks are just covered in those midge larvae.
Ah, so
So
they're not struggling for food, basically.
no, especially not at that site where I was looking at them.
No, that makes yeah, because basically that's how we met, wasn't it? I think that's how we met was through spawning barbel because I was trying to film spawning barbel for ages, and then that's kind of how I came across you and the sort of fishy ether that is the internet, and you
Exactly.
sort of helped me out on the team looking for them, which was the sheer numbers of them. There's so many in there. It was absolutely stuffed with barbel, which was really nice to see.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a few. What do they need to thrive then? Like what does a barbel need to kind of lead a happy life?
Yeah, so yeah, obviously they need to have plenty of food, which includes kind of invertebrates. So yeah, basically bugs in the river and river flies. They will sometimes eat smaller fish, so we did think that they had kind of like minnows sometimes in the diet once they got older. And then obviously they have a lot of like food from fishermen. So yeah, they get these kind of contributions of like spam and fish meal pellets into the diet. So yeah, plenty of extra food is often coming in where there's a lot of angling. So yeah, obviously they need an abundant source of food. They also need quite connected rivers because like lots of fish, they'll kind of migrate so they can do their spawning. Now, not like a salmon where they migrate to sea, but they will travel within the river. Um, and then what they need to find is clean gravel. So, yeah, again, a bit like a salmon, they'll make a nest in the riverbed where they'll put the eggs into, and the male and female will spawn over the kind of gravel at the same time. And yeah, if that gravel's not really clean, then it's difficult for the eggs to really thrive, and even for them to like dig a nest if the gravel isn't the right size. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
because it's interesting that it's one of the things I've stopped saying is migratory fish and non-migratory fish because everyone always lumps salmon with that. But I think that all fish are migratory to some degree, aren't they? And I remember it was you and I forget, is it Emma? I've really sorry, I forgot her surname. She did a study on bream, didn't she? Um,
Yeah, Emma Nolan and
that's it.
Emily Winters as well, I think, was
Um,
looking at bream.
and the lengths I can't remember the figure off the top of my head, but these bream were migrating massive distances, and I assume barbel are the same in river that they'll go quite a fair way to find good spawning. Like the team, for example, like during the spawning. I mean, you'll know this better than me, but it would have like much higher numbers of barbel than it normally would because they're traveling specifically to the team to spawn, I believe. Is that right?
Exactly, yeah. Like the
Yeah.
team is quite a nice river with areas of really good kind of gravels within it. And yeah, a lot of the fish would come up from the Severn into the team during that spawning season.
Yeah. So they must be, some of them must be. I mean, I guess without tagging them, it's hard to know, but they must be going a fair way to get there. I think it's easy as a fisherman to just think, oh, well, that barbel just sits under that tree and it's there all day, every day. But they move around. They certainly can get some distance going when they need to.
Exactly, yeah. And that was another part of the PhD. We did catch the fish and tag them.
Oh, you did? Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, we use it's called acoustic tags where we do like a minor surgery. The tag goes inside the fish and it emits like a sound. And then we put these like listening stations across the river. And so we first did that study, and I think the maximum range we detected was around 12 kilometers from
Oh,
one
okay.
individual fish, and that's just like the overall range. Um, but then we tagged some like the following years, and we decided to move the receivers further away to check because we often found that they went past the receiver we put the furthest away, so we weren't picking up the whole range. And then, yeah, I think 37 kilometers was the biggest distance, like home range, we got the following tracking
Wow.
study.
That's incredible, isn't it? That's mad to
Yeah.
think that they would go that far. You mentioned about like what they were eating. How do you know what a barbel's eating?
So you can do a few things, but one of the things we mostly use, it's called stable isotopes. So it's like a kind of chemical study, and you can study lots of things. So we basically look into the carbon and nitrogen levels, and we'll do that of a range of things we think they might be eating. And then for fish, you can take that. That could be like a muscle biopsy, or you could take a scale, or a little clip of a fin, or even the mucus. But yeah, lots of things that like don't really kind of damage the fish. So we use scales a lot of the time. And then yeah, you basically compare it to those other foods, and you can even estimate percentages of
Oh
how much of
wow.
those things they're eating. So
What?
yeah, with the pellets, we found there was a range from like 9% up to 71% of
Oh
pellets making up the
wow.
diet. So yeah, for some fish, they absolutely obviously love them and are
Yeah.
eating huge volumes of them.
So when you see like on rivers like the Trent and the Severn where you are getting these very big barbel, do you think pellets are contributing to that? Do you think that's why they're getting bigger?
Yeah, I would think so. And I
Mm.
think there are a range of maybe quality of those foods, but some of them will have like quite high fat and protein content,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, and that'll obviously contribute to good growth.
Oh, that's amazing to say. What about natural foods? Was there a natural food they were preferring? I guess it varies fish to fish, doesn't it?
Yeah, that varies, and a lot of the bug or invertebrate signatures are quite similar to each other, so we did find it
Uh,
difficult to tease that apart. But in the juvenile fish, like I said, for the barbel, like they love the chironomid
yes.
larvae,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and they'll be just hoovering them up off of the rocks. And even at that stage, they're eating just things like diatoms, which is that like hairy green slime on the rocks. So even like a bit vegetarian, I guess, when they're quite young.
Oh, I didn't know. Would they take crayfish? I guess they would, wouldn't they? Do you find crayfish in the diet at all?
I didn't really look at that in the team. I
No.
don't think they had huge amounts of crayfish in the team.
There definitely are
Um,
some in there because I found a crayfish pot that someone had legally put and I lifted it up and there was a signal crayfish in it. But I think there's only
yeah.
one in it. I think it's that quick that they don't, there's not many in there, but they are in there.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm not sure off the top of my head. It wasn't
No,
something
okay.
that I looked at.
No, okay. You'd think they probably would have a little munch on them though, wouldn't you? I can't
Yeah,
see
I
them
think
turning that down.
they're relatively generalist, but yeah, how pinchy a crayfish is when it gets eaten, I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't fancy eating one with the claws and everything. Be a bit of a chew. What about frets to barbel? I mean, I know they're not endangered and they're relatively common, but I guess they still must have some frets.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things I've been really interested in the last few years is this like sedimentation or yeah, sediment coming from the land into the rivers. So yeah, that happens from a range of things, but like intensive farming, for example, or allowing animals to graze right up until the riverbank. And all of that erosion can mean all that soil goes into the river. Obviously, to some degree, that's natural, but in high volumes, that can clog up the gravels where they want to spawn or even feed from. Um, and for the eggs, that's a real problem because gravel blocked up with mud basically doesn't have water flowing through it and therefore doesn't have new oxygen coming in. So they could almost, yeah, that lack of oxygen might mean the eggs would die. Um, or it can mean that it's so blocked up they struggle to emerge where there's no
Uh,
gaps. But what some studies have found is actually that where it's full of mud and there's not enough oxygen, they actually leave the gravel early. So usually the larvae stay in the gravel with like their yolk sac, so they can keep feeding without actually taking any prey. Um, but if the conditions are poor in the gravel, they'll leave early and be in the riverbed. But like their fins haven't grown properly yet and they don't have very strong muscles, so they can't swim against the flow of water. So they might just get washed downstream.
okay.
And also, if they're not good at swimming yet, they obviously are very vulnerable to being eaten by predators. So, yeah, I think that's a real issue for a whole range of fish, but especially barbel who make these nests.
Yeah, that would make sense. And I suppose that's well, on paper, a relatively easy thing to solve. I guess like fence off or don't let the cattle near it. But that's easier said than done in a lot of cases, I bet.
Exactly, yeah, and that is still just looking at like those fields either side of the river, but really the whole catchment needs to be looked at in terms of how we manage the land and the sediment.
I suppose it's a death by a thousand cuts as well, isn't it? Because obviously that's not going to kill the adult. So you can have a river that still has big barbel for a decade or so after that happens. You know, oh yeah, it's okay, and then all of a sudden they're gone because they're not recruiting.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's something we're not looking at very much with our like monitoring are how many nests are being made and how many of those eggs are surviving.
Yeah.
Partly because it's so hard to see them, obviously, because it's under kind of under the gravel. But it's a real missing bit of the picture, I think.
And just anecdotally for the filming I do, I very rarely see small barbel. I just don't know whether they're cryptic or just they are a low density species. I don't know. But like whenever I've got cameras in the river, occasionally I might see one about the size of my hand, but very rarely see anything. It might just be I'm lumping them in with other stuff, but the small barbel seem to be a bit elusive generally.
Yeah, so we surveyed them again for part of the PhD research and we'd go like every other week throughout the summer and yeah, there'd be like sometimes hardly any of them are around and other times quite large numbers. So yeah, it might be that they disperse kind of relatively quickly out of the areas. Um, but yeah, they're definitely in relatively high numbers in the team when I was studying them. So we
Okay.
would we would sometimes get yeah, kind of 100 in the net at some point. So
Oh wow.
yeah,
Because a lot of people, well, I say a lot of people, occasionally I'll post a picture of a baby barbel and there'll always be someone who pipes up and says it's a gudgeon and I just want to punch them in the face. And it's like,
extreme.
it's very, yeah, it's just like, it's very clearly about, it's got the four, I try and explain all that and then I just think, oh, I'm just ice skating uphill here, so I can't be bothered with it. But there's always someone, I guess because a lot of anglers typically they're seeing barbel that are, pretty chunky and they don't see the really tiny ones because small barbel they do look quite different to the adults, don't they? Or relatively different.
Yeah,
They've got
yeah,
the
they
kind of
do.
speckling and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I
But
did worry when I first started if I'd be able to tell the two apart, but yeah, it didn't take long to get my eye in.
I always just say just look at the barbules, or barbels, I should say now. But it's the easiest thing. Gudgeon have two, barbel have four, so it's really easy
Exactly.
to do that. Have you come across anything with barbel in lakes? Because I know certainly anglers can get a bit angsty about that. Like stockers, they're not naturally found in lakes generally, are they? But some fishermen get a bit funny about them being put into lakes.
Yeah, I've not really done any research on that, but I've
No.
I've obviously seen it kind of come up in the literature and as far as I'm aware, yeah, it's just not kind of the best suited habitat for them because they've
Hmm.
evolved to be in fast flowing water.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so and I wonder where they would spawn in a lake because in
I
the
don't think
river,
they would they? I don't think they'd
no,
recruit.
exactly. So yeah,
Because I did look into it with in Europe, and I know what a lot of the barbel will do when it gets very hot or very cold. They'll almost, I don't know if hibernate's the right word, but they'll go into these lakes that are connected to rivers and sort of get out of it a bit and then go back into them. It might be a different species, to be fair. I think it was common barbel, but I think they're more likely to go in lakes in continental Europe, but there's more big rivers and connecting into lakes there.
yeah, maybe. I mean, Barbel will certainly hang out in those like slack, slow flowing areas within the river. They'll really like those spaces, but they still need obviously, yeah, that connection to move back
Yeah.
where they can. And that's interesting you bring up like winter. Um, some research at Bournemouth Uni that they've been doing looking at the winter movements of Barbel. And some of the old literature kind of assumed that they would be very sedentary in the winter, basically not move because it's too cold and so low metabolism and not much food around. But the recent kind of tagging has shown they're actually still relatively active in the winter,
Oh,
um,
okay.
moving as much as like 25 kilometers through the winter,
Oh, wow.
um, which kind of went against what was widely thought about them.
Because we're at the northern edge of their range, right? In the
We
UK?
are,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay. So you would expect them to, oh, I don't know, I guess deal with the cold a bit more, but yeah, that's really interesting. Have you done anything with any other barbel species? Have you done anything with any of the European ones? Have you been over there at all?
A little bit, yeah. So obviously, I was just saying they're like not really native to these western flowing rivers,
Yeah.
but they're also not really native across a lot of Italy, and they're being introduced down there as well.
The same species that we have.
Yeah, so
Yeah, okay.
Barbus barbus.
Yeah, yeah.
And like I was saying, we don't really see any huge problems with the non-native status in the UK, but in Italy they've got other native barbel species, so like the Tiber barbel, um, and yeah, they've got a couple of unique barbel that are only kind of around Italy, and they're generally smaller than the European barbel. Um, so that's a bit of a problem because that then bigger barbel can outcompete the others in terms of food,
Ah,
but
okay.
also where they're closely related, they can also hybridize. So they've basically bred together, and then you're losing that unique genetics of the local Italian barbel. And then you further get a problem of the hybrids also competing for food with the local fish.
Of course.
So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, much more of a problem down there, I think, than it has been for us.
Is that, I might be remembering this wrong. Did you post a picture of one of these barbel? It was quite funky looking. Was it spotty or stripy or something? Is that you?
That is the leopard barbel I think you might be thinking of,
I
which
am
was
thinking of,
found, I
yes, I am
think, in
thinking.
Turkey, and
Oh,
that was one
okay.
of these lost fish that they thought was extinct, and then they found it again, which is great news.
Yeah, because I think I jokingly said we need to get a few of those over here. But yeah, it's surprising. Yeah, because I think we have this in the UK where we've just tend to have like one every, like we've got one roach, one rudd, one barbel. But you go to Europe and there's a dozen different kinds of roach and there's a dozen kinds of rudd and barbel. It's the sheer volume of species across Europe is incredible, really.
Absolutely, yeah. And I guess that's it. We're like quite disconnected, aren't we, as an
Yeah,
island? And only a certain number of fish managed to get over here after the ice age. But yeah,
yeah.
you go down to the Mediterranean, there's so many different fish to study. It's really fascinating.
So is it Spain? Or I don't know if they still get. Is it Cosimo? I might be saying this wrong. Cosimo or Cosimo bar. They get the very big barbel there, don't they?
Oh, I don't know.
Do you
But
not
yeah,
know?
it sounds
Oh,
great.
Katie, you should know this.
Spanish barbel are right on
Yeah,
my list.
yeah. I'm sure they get a species of, and it gets to like 40, 50 pounds. It gets quite big over there, but it looks a bit like ours, but it's just much chunkier. But and they get a few different species. But yeah, I'd love to go see those at some point. That's on my to-do list somewhere down the line.
Yeah, that'd be great. And one thing I is on my to-do list is to go to Austria, where they have really clear water, and there's like a lot of groups who go scuba diving with the barbel.
Oh,
Um,
really? Do you
and
know
yeah,
whereabouts?
I'll let you know. I have it on one of my social media sites. I often
Okay.
watch it.
Because I think I might is it a guy scuba diving? He's like hand feeding them.
Yeah, exactly.
I have seen that. Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I'm going to Vienna in October so I will be in Austria for a few days, and my plan was to go try and find Hutchin,
Oh
but
yeah,
but I could maybe squeeze in some Barbel as well, because that would be amazing. But yeah, the clarity of the rivers over there is phenomenal, isn't it? Yeah, they know how to look after a river.
exactly. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I've always had a hobby, go scuba diving. I do that in the sea, but then my work is often looking at fish in the river. So yeah, it'd be awesome to combine the two of those and go diving with barbel.
Have you dived in the river before? Have you done any river diving?
No, I don't think I have. I think either they're too shallow or too hazardous
Yeah, yeah,
or too muddy.
yeah, it's different. I've snorkeled in rivers a hell of a lot. I've only dived rivers a few times, and yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's either too shallow and you can't really get a dive in, or it's just too mucky. But it'd be interesting to see what Barbel would be like because I think if you could get a deep pool and get in with them, then you could probably stand half a chance of getting there. I've snorkeled with Barbel and had them around me, but they're a bit weary. Like I think they just think I'm a gangly otter, and they just don't want to know. They're just they're off.
Yeah,
But yeah, that video I'm pretty sure I've seen. I think it was on Vimeo or YouTube or something. And yeah, there's just someone like hand feeding barbel pellets or something. It's mad.
exactly. And I guess it's like the barbel that I used to the anglers, once they get used to it's not a problem. So I guess if they
Yeah,
go and they feed them there regularly, they get used to it.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
I'd imagine if I got in a river in the UK with a barbel, all the bubbles and stuff would probably just scare them
They
away.
would probably freak out, wouldn't they? Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe. So are they? I'm assuming they're your favorite fish, but they might not be. What's your favorite fish?
Yeah, no, barbel are definitely my
Okay, good.
favorite
All right. I was
fish,
always
but
going to say something like, haddock or something like what? So, yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, look, it's always good to talk barbel. So you're not really working on them at the minute, or they're always in the back of your mind?
I'm always trying to work on them. Yeah. Always trying to find my way back to barbel.
Yeah, because where are you based? Are you based southwest? You said you're working at Plymouth.
So yeah, that's an interesting one actually. Yeah, I'm down in the southwest in Plymouth at the minute, and they're not really in our rivers down here, although
No.
there are now a lot of reported sightings of them in the Ex.
Is there
Um,
really?
yeah, so I did joke when I moved down here about the opportunity to study the invasion of them into the southwest, and yeah, it looks like that actually might be happening.
Is this you softly hinting that it was you in a white van with a load of barbel and they've got you can't confirm. Oh, you're nodding. You can't see the video. She's nodding and she's saying yes.
I would never do such a thing.
No, no. To clarify, she's not. I don't want to get Katie banged up in prison. But that in all seriousness, that's probably how they got there. Someone's got a white van and just bopped a load of. But they didn't fly there, did they? So they
Exactly.
they
They've
would have.
thought, oh, I'm sick of driving to these other rivers to go fishing. I'll bring them down here.
Yeah, the whole of the Southwest is a bit like that, isn't it? Like once you sort of get into Devon and Cornwall, there's not many native coarse fish at all, is there? I think most of them are introduced at some point, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. Mostly
Yeah,
just kind of trout and salmon and then the smaller ones, like the minnow and gudgeon and
yeah.
stuff.
Let's get there. Oh well, at least you got some on your doorstep for good or for worse now, anyway.
Exactly.
That'd
Yeah, and
be
we've got some stereo cameras, so hoping to go and put them in the X at some point and see if we can record them in there.
yeah, it'd be interesting. Well, look, it's a pleasure talking fish, and it's nice to talk about barbel because they are. I have to admit, grayling pipped the post a little bit for me, but barbel are a very close second. I do like barbel. Like living near the Trent, we've got bucket loads of them, so I do like barbel. But yeah, thanks for coming on, Katie.
No problem. It's a pleasure. It's always great to talk about barbel.
Yeah, definitely.